Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm UTC President and CEO Rusty Williams. I want to thank you for joining us today on this special edition of the UTC podcast that we're calling C-Suite Conversations. If you haven't already, I encourage you to go back and listen to some of the other episodes. But if you have, I appreciate that and encourage you to participate in today's conversation as well. In this episode, I'm happy to welcome as our guest Donda Bishop of AFL. Donda is the general manager of AFL's aerial cable business unit, and that encompasses the OPGW product that many of us know, as well as the ADSS product, among other cable products. AFL, as many of us know, has been in business for 40 years and manufactures end-to-end solutions for the utility, service provider, enterprise, and industrial markets. Their products include optical cable, electrical transmission and substation hardware, connectivity, and test equipment. Donda's been in her current role for 7 years, but she spent her entire career in various roles at AFL. She's a graduate of Clemson University with a BS in electrical engineering and from the University of South Carolina with an MBA. Miss Donna, it's great to have you with us today on the UTC podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Rusty, to spend some time with you and the UTC family. You and I have known each other for many years, actually spent some time together at AFL. So for me, this is like catching up with a longtime friend. So thank you for the opportunity. I look forward to talking with you.
Same here, same here. And the name AFL, for a lot of the people that'll be listening, people that play in this utility space, they know the name AFL. I was thinking about it this morning. It was kind of going back through the notes. And for those of us that are old, like myself, and have been around this industry for 30 or 40 years, AFL's been around that same period. And we all know the name AFL if we've done any fiber work at all, or not even just fiber. As we said, there's other products we'll talk about as we go forward. But if there's somebody here that's new to the industry, new to the market, new to UTC, give us the short elevator speech, if you will, about who AFL is and what you guys do.
Sure. So for many years, our tagline has been "We Connect," and it really is the accurate way to kind of summarize what it is we do. Put simply, electricity and digital information connect the world, and AFL provides products and services that are part of the infrastructure needed to make those connections. We physically connect the world's energy infrastructure with our cable and hardware products that link the grid. Products like OPGW, compression, substation accessories, copper-clad steel wire, those types of products, they work on the energy side. And then we connect the digital infrastructure with our telecom products, cable, connectivity, splicing, testing, and some folks don't know we even have a services division that designs and installs those world-class telecom networks. So when you think wired and wireless solutions for everything from national broadband networks, AI, machine learning data centers, sporting venues, AFL is kind of right in the middle of all of that. And who doesn't love a good selfie at a Clemson football game, right? So all of that is possible because we connect all of those things.
Yeah, I see some of those pictures from time to time. And you got to have something to cheer for. Unfortunately, this year, one of my team that I cheer for, that's a red team here in Alabama.
It's been a rough year.
Well,
been a rough year.
You can keep cheering anyway. We keep cheering. The one thing I always appreciated about AFL is they understood their niche, right? And as you described various products, AFL doesn't have to provide end-to-end products for a complete solution. They find their niche, and whether it's substation hardware, or many people don't know, it even carries over to transportation, with light rail products and other things. And you kind of understand your niche and, find it, leverage it for the greater good, as I like to call it, for the industry. And that way you can, any company that does that, you end up having, your expertise, and you do it well. And then you let other people that do their things, that's a part of that as well. So when you look across that landscape, again, as you mentioned, it's service providers. It could be wireless companies, it's enterprise markets, industrial markets, all this kind of stuff. And for the things that you guys do, hyperscalers, I didn't mention hyperscalers, right? You guys have been deep into the data center space for a good while with a lot of the connectivity products. How do those markets differ, or do they differ? Do they, from AFL's perspective, this way I'll ask you to look at it. If you're making products for, a wireless company as opposed to an enterprise, as opposed to a whatever, yeah, do they differ that much in the stuff that you guys do?
Well, yeah, as you noted, our primary customers in the early days really were just the electric utilities and some long haul carriers like MCI, WorldCom, and some others. But as you noted, we go across many markets now. It's really 5 key markets. We still have those important energy and service provider customers and markets, but we touch enterprise, we touch industrial, as you noted, and certainly hyperscale has just been a very busy space for us. And there are some similarities. For instance, I'd say product quality is sort of a table stakes. There's no tolerance in any market for products that are advertised for one thing and that really don't perform. So that's a given. I think, when we go back to our early days, utility engineers are typically belt and suspenders kind of people, right? So the reliability and resiliency of the grid, that's their main focus. Keep the
Mm-hmm.
lines humming, get them back up quickly if they go down. These are the metrics that the utilities care about, that have kind of ingrained themselves in our DNA for how we think about products. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a natural risk aversion to anything that would pose a risk to key metrics that utilities think about. And it tends to lend itself to a if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality. And from a personal perspective, after having just lived through 8 days of no power at my home after Hurricane Helene, I appreciate that focus on keeping the lights on, right? And having a mentality that says, I want products that work and that don't fail. Helene was a rough period for the Southeast. Prayers and support continue to go out to our friends and family around us in the region. But for the utilities, there's too much at stake to risk something not working, right? So the pool, I'd say, for technology advancement is paved with caution. A lot of testing, a lot of vetting. It's all focused on reliability. I don't want to imply that there aren't advancements. Our customers ask us for innovations regularly. It just means that the driver from a utility is a little bit different than other parts of our business. I'd say policy plays a big role in technology for the utilities, and what gets regulated gets done. And so regulation is a big technology motivation for the utilities. Now, I'd say counter that with the other side of the spectrum, the hyperscale market. We talk about those guys.
Mm-hmm.
Tremendous amount of growth in this sector right now related to artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I kind of liken it to an arms race. They're building their infrastructure, and each hyperscaler is trying to beat the other guy, right, to be first. So the pace of that market, and I'd say the adoption of new technology, is very different from our roots in the utility space. Demand for cable and connectivity, it's really testing global supply at this point. Uh, in light of a contraction, I would say, over the last 12 to 18 months for what I would say is traditional fiber optic cable demand, after the BEAD funding was slowed, and some of the demand for typical fiber optic cable was not as strong as we thought it was going to be, for the hyperscalers to kind of come on top of that and do this hockey stick type of demand curve. That's been very different than anything that we've seen before from our traditional, I'd say, utility roots. Right now, it's he who scales fastest wins. So speed and urgency is very different in this space than it's been for our traditional roots. And AFL is learning and pivoting and growing pretty fast, right? So that's been a couple of key differences for us in terms of how the markets look very different from, I'd say, our origins back 40 years ago.
Yeah, it is interesting if you play in all those markets to see those demands that you just described. You hit the nail on the head with the utility markets, right? It's, don't mess it up. Whatever
Right.
you do, don't mess it up. And we'll talk about that in just a minute, a little bit more. But yeah, the hyperscalers, it's, get it to me, get it to me, get it to me, bigger, better, faster. And then some of these service providers, it's all about the price.
That's right.
One penny difference in the price can
Yeah,
make it swing one way or the other.
it's very
So
true.
being in all those markets, and in the, you didn't talk a lot about the test equipment market, but we think of a lot of the electronics that are, we all leverage in this being, most of it manufactured in Southeast Asia somehow, some way, and you guys are doing that as well and being successful at it. So, that's great that you're able to do that. So let's go back and talk about the utility space just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm one of the old guys, as I mentioned earlier, and I actually started as a distribution engineer. I think I've mentioned that on every podcast, and I figure out some way. It's a drinking game, or I get paid or something. I don't know. Bell rings every time I say that. But you kind of learn the business. That's what I appreciated about it. Is looking back at it, was able to learn the business, and as you said, the main objective is to keep the lights on. And, the antiquated reference is keep the meter spinning, but meters don't spin anymore, right? But keep the lights on. And that means you don't go at breakneck speed. You don't want version 1, serial number 1 of anything that's new coming down the road. But when we look, over the past 5 years, the last 8 years, the last 10 years, that is changing in the utility market to some degree, right? The primary objective is still the same. But when you think of things like, grid modernization, what we used to call smart grid, you look at all of the electric vehicles, the two-way flow of energy, all the things that we're having to deal with now in the utility space that is pushing that industry into being more forward-thinking. Don't wait 10 years to do something. Can I really have belt and suspenders, as you said, as you referenced earlier? So if you guys, if AFL and other companies like yourself have looked at making these products with high quality, and you may not, there's not a breakneck speed in getting things done necessarily. How does this change in the market affect people like yourself? Companies like AFL, when you go from being sort of stodgy, I'll call it, to being on the forefront of some of these technologies?
Yeah, so it's a good question, but I think the what gets regulated gets done kind of comes back to mind in terms of the two-way distribution of energy, integration of DERs. Some of those things would not be things that the utilities would have wanted to adopt if it had not been for some of the policy
True.
changes.
Good
And so
point.
we have to acknowledge as a manufacturer in this space, and determine how the tides are shifting. So one of the things at the 40-year mark of our business, what's the next 40 years really going to look like for us? And how is the changing face of this market affecting how we approach it, right? So one of the very first things that we think about as our strategy for how do we approach this evolution. And I'd say it's not a fast evolution in the energy space, but it's happening. Back to those hyperscalers, they're a big part of why it's happening. Carbon reduction, green initiatives, they're also part of it as well. But it makes us kind of step back and go, all right, what's our strategy going to be as this evolution happens kind of right in front of our faces? We can be guilty, because we're so steeped in the energy market, of drinking our own Kool-Aid sometimes, and thinking that we know everything about this market that we live in and swim in every day. So there was a small group of us wanted to be very intentional about how we step back and really understand how the face of this market is changing, what the drivers are, what the challenges are, what the opportunities are. What are the factors that are influencing change that might be new? Think hyperscale, that's a fairly new factor in this space. So part of our thinking is to make sure that we're fully engaged and understand how the environment is changing. So we did a very intentional engagement with our customers and other stakeholders in the market, really to understand what the challenges are. And I'd say, hopefully it didn't take all this time for us to say that lead times on transformers are much too long. Like, if there was one clear learning from this process, it's that we understand that people can't get transformers as fast as they need them. I don't think AFL is going to solve that problem anytime soon, but that was one just resounding truth that kept coming no matter who we asked. So, but there are other challenges, and I won't say, having been in this space most of my career, not many of them are new, but maybe they're taking on a new urgency. Aging infrastructure, how do you pay for it, right? Back to your regulatory environment. Load growth and the need to add it quickly. There's that word, quickly. that
Mhm.
doesn't typically penetrate our thinking in the utility space. That goes back. The driver there is the hyperscale AI machine learning drivers. Um, Costly and extreme weather events. Okay, well, that's a reality. Hurricane Helene, very fresh in our memories here.
Right.
Back to your carbon footprint drivers and the regulatory environment there. An aging workforce. I hate to say it, Rusty, but you and I aren't going to be here forever. So someone's got to kind of come in and foster a new generation that can take this forward. So the purpose in our sort of step back and thinking was, how do we, what are the challenges and are we aware of them, and kind of poke our heads up out of the everyday churn that we're in, and make sure that we're aware of how this environment is changing, right? Because
Right.
if you're not aware, then you certainly can't do anything about it. And I
Yeah.
just named a few of the challenges. I'm sure you could name a few more. Here, I'll let you. What are we missing?
No, workforce is one interesting thing that I love to talk about it, in the right environments, because over the last 20 years, it's been difficult to get young people fresh out of school into the utility space specifically, just because it wasn't really flashy and sexy. It was looked at as it was. I mean, it
Old
was
and stodgy, right? So not
pretty
changing.
mundane. Do the same thing. I can't be creative. I'll go to work for Facebook or Google or whoever, those kind of companies. But I think that is changing now with the implementation of technologies and the challenges that utilities are having to face. I think that is going to change to a certain degree, and AI is going to play a part in the utility space, just like it's going to play in manufacturing or other markets. So I think it's going to draw people in that may not have traditionally given a second look to this market. But
Very
I think
true.
it's interesting that AFL's done that sort of strategic view. UTC did the same thing. I started at the
Oh,
beginning of the year. Last year they celebrated their 75th anniversary, and so as we were doing strategic planning this year, it was, hey, let's just don't look at next year. Let's don't look at this as a have to do exercise. Let's really take advantage of it, like you were describing. And
exactly. Yep.
we actually looked 25 years out.
Wow.
What
Okay.
does the 100th anniversary of UTC look like, and what's this market going to be, and what do we need to do as a service provider, so to speak, information provider, advocacy influencer, all those kind of things. And so that's an interesting exercise to go through.
Yeah,
Uh,
we've kind of created, I'd say, a market study for our management, with a goal. So if you're looking at, the next 25, we are, if we're at the 40-year mark, what do we want to be? We're set AFL up for success in another 40 years, right? So
mhm.
um, take that learning. How do we then digest it, process it, and make recommendations against it? So one of the things, that's the second part of the strategy, and I'd say that part's being written. It's not there's not a great reveal that I can give you today. Maybe on a future podcast I can do that. But one key learning, I'd say I'll give you a surprise learning that we had, and this was
Okay.
sort of a bias that we went in with, and we kind of went in eyes wide open. There's about 7 or 8 of us, eyes wide open. What are all the things we think are true? And then we forced ourselves to determine, are they true or are they not true? And one was, we had a strong belief that the utilities needed more sensors and more data. And we have absolutely emerged that is absolutely not the case. There's tons of data already available from the grid. It's just managing that data and actioning that data
Right.
is the opportunity. So there's nothing that and the UTC folks for sure know the importance of data. There's an abundance of data. It's actually, how do you get your arms around it? For instance, at IEEE, several papers on the integration of DERs, distributed energy resources, back into the grid. So the data for the DERs is available, but it's difficult to access it and action it so that the utility knows how my two-way street is now running, right? So that was one that was a bias that we had, and something that we thought was going to be a truth, and that we unearthed, if you will. We kind of reversed course on that. So that process, we've improved our understanding of the market, and at least acknowledged some biases that we had and tried to clear those where we could.
Right.
And so step one, if you any good strategy starts with where you are today. So I think we have a really good understanding of the market, our position in the market, and some of the needs of the market. Part two of our strategy will be what do we do with that learning? But step A in part two is really, I'd say, a recognition by ourselves and our management, the role that the regulatory environment plays,
Mm-hmm.
and that policy shifts can hurt or help our business. And I would say we've probably been a bit passive in terms of just hearing what policy is happening, and assessing it kind of after the fact. Not to say that we're going to, set up a lobby or anything, because I don't think we're anywhere close to that. But maybe we should at least have ears on the ground somewhere that are giving us near-term views of what's being proposed, as opposed to post post-op views of what
Right.
happened. So we
Yeah,
we call
and
it a policy wonk, right, for lack of a better
hopefully that's
term.
something that UTC can help with as well.
Absolutely.
In part of what we do. All right, so I'm going to hang a right here. So hang on. I'm take the conversation in a slightly different direction.
Okay.
So we mentioned your background in the intro, degreed engineer, MBA, been at one company for your career, manufacturing business that supports, utility industry among others. So let me ask you to give us some insights as a female in this industry. Again, whether it's technical industry, it's having working with the utility industry, or in the manufacturing sector itself. What kind of opportunities or limitations do you think you've experienced over that time period?
Well, it's a fun question. I'd say it shocks me to think that in March of next year I'll have been at AFL for 30 years. Like, good gosh, where does the time go? Um, but it's been fun, and it is fun. I will say sometimes I look around the room and think, wow, there's like 30 people in here and only two women, and I'm the only engineer. Like, that still happens today. It was the same in college, so it's how I met my wonderful husband. I was one of only two women in the room, and I picked the guy that I wanted, and he was, maybe lucky or unlucky enough to say yeah. But so it's still the same. It feels very much the same. Um, has never really kind of been intimidating, and it really emboldens me to be the voice and the one who represents what my type of diversity can do. AFL has been incredibly generous with opportunities for people who work hard and who want to grow. So I've
Right.
never felt kind of held back or overlooked, or you're not ready or anything like that. And I'm extremely grateful. And as for that matter, AFL has a very active women in manufacturing chapter, with a lot of members in our company, not just here in Duncan, because AFL is a global company with women all over the world. So that's been a good connection to have, where we can encourage, learn, motivate each other. I get opportunities to go to those meetings, or also even speak at those meetings. Manufacturing itself, I'd say it's not for the faint of heart. It is every day a new challenge. Um, but it's actually really rewarding to see something that we made go to a customer. I'll say end up on Duke Energy's transmission line that feeds our manufacturing plants here in South Carolina and my home. Like, that is so incredibly full circle feeling and very rewarding. So it's, manufacturing has been, I didn't even think of it as that when I started. It was a job in operations, working as a process engineer. But there's so many wonderful jobs centered around manufacturing in our state and in the Southeast. Consider myself very, very fortunate to have been at AFL all these years.
Yeah, so I agree with the same what you're saying. Again, I am not in the demographic that I was asking about, but I think there is opportunity for anybody, regardless of background or
Absolutely.
anything else, if they really want to get in and work hard and do the right thing and be a part of these teams that do all these great and wonderful things.
It's
So I
fun.
mentioned that, or you mentioned, and I did as well, is we're on the, how can I say this nicely? We're on the back half of our career. All right. Now, I'm much farther back in the career cycle, but when you look back at what you've learned and what you know today through all those experiences, if you could go back and talk to yourself when you were coming out of Clemson for the first time and trying to figure out what you were going to do, or just got your job at AFL and were getting started, what kind of career advice would you give yourself? What's the one thing that you could think of when you look back and tell Donda, 30 years ago, what would you do? What would you tell them?
Yeah. So first of all, I hope I would listen. Can be a bit stubborn at times, but let's assume I would actually pay attention to me. Um, what one thing that I recognize now is I would have engaged a mentor
Hmm.
inside the company and outside. Didn't even know that was a thing at that point in time. So engage for anyone fairly new, or even you don't have to be new in your career, but it never hurts to have someone that you can trust, that you can bounce ideas and get clear, you know, truthful feedback to you that is not motivated by trying to get you to do something, that your boss might not be clear because they don't want to discourage you or something. So seek a mentor, um, and leverage that. Invest in those IT skills that will never serve you wrong, right? So figure
Right.
out how to the latest software, Power BI, other tools that are available for you to grow from. Um, and I guess, one bit of advice, it is to pursue the roles that even you think you're not capable of. As a former boss of mine said, if you take a job that you know you can do, you probably didn't reach too high. So be willing to push yourself out of that comfort zone, and then just crush it. Don't worry about where you're going to go next. Do that job to the best of your ability, and I guarantee you opportunities will find you.
That's it. That's great advice. And I jotted down one for myself, and you just got it. The last thing you said, and it's something that I learned, a little too late in my career. Not early in my career, but don't be afraid to take a chance. That's kind of the way I
That's
look
right.
at it. Push
That's right.
yourself and do the best you can, as you said, wherever you happen to be, and then things will happen from that point, as long as you're
Very
willing and you
true.
got your eyes open and you want to do something great and wonderful. There's lots of opportunities out there.
They'll
Donda,
find you. You won't have to go looking, right?
that's
So
right. That's right. Well, it's been a
awesome.
great time together. I want to thank you for
Yeah,
coming and being a part of the conversation, this
you bet.
series, getting to learn more about yourself as well as AFL for those that didn't know. I want to thank you on behalf of AFL for your support and participation in UTC, and look forward to
Absolutely.
that relationship continuing as we go on down the road.
You bet. Thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity. You guys are a good partner to us. Thank you for the relationships through the decades. Look forward to continuing that. Thank you, Rusty.
Absolutely. Well, that'll do it for this particular episode of the C-Suite Conversations. I hope you'll subscribe to all the UTC podcasts and be on the lookout for future episodes. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you.